So when we come to a scripture like this and Jesus has said something twice, he's trying to get a point across that we don't necessarily get on first pass. So I decided to say, let's look at what salt was used for in the ancient world. I'm sure a lot of things we're all familiar with. We use it to preserve food. We use it to enhance the taste of food. I'm in the midst right now of kind of a sourdough kick, making sourdough bread. And one time I forgot to put in 8 grams of salt. That's less than a teaspoon. And the bread was terrible. Lenore's like, ugh, what is this? But that little bit of salt, does anybody, bread baker, know what salt does?
Yes, I do. Just did it yesterday.
So what does salt do besides give taste?
Oh, it kind of makes it kind of smooth, and it adds like leavening kind of things to it. It gives it texture.
Not the answer I'm looking
No,
for.
okay.
That's all
That's
true.
what mine and
Any
the
other
flour.
bakers? Salt slows down the rising. If you don't have salt in bread, it will rise much quicker than if you do. So a part of the reason sourdough has to have salt in it is it's a very, very, very slow rising bread. In fact, oftentimes I've let it rise 8 or 10 hours before I bake it. And it really enhances the flavor. So we all know it's for salt, or for seasoning, it's for slowing down the rise of bread. It's for making food last longer. A lot of people salt fish and things like that. But the Israelites used salt for 2 completely different things. All those things, yes, but they also discovered that when you mix it with manure, it enhances the fertilizer properties of manure. Just a little teeny bit, a little bit of salt. So outside the average Israelite household, there would always be a pile of salt. Of course, they didn't have to buy it at the store because the Dead Sea's not that far away. They have all the salt they could possibly want. But in the courtyard of a typical Israelite household, there were 2 piles of salt. And one pile was used for making fertilizer. So that was, the salt is good that's used for food and food preparation and stuff like that. That was the more pure stuff. And then the not quite so pure stuff was used to mix in just a little teeny bit with manure for fertilizer. And then when salt was almost completely useless, dirty, filthy, nasty, there was another pile, and they would send the little kids out. If you're looking for a daytime activity for little kids, get salt and manure, and you mix them up about 4 parts manure to 1 part salt. So you're putting a lot of salt in the manure, and then they set it out to dry, and that's what they used in the community ovens to bake. They discovered when they add a lot of salt, what it actually does is it enhances the properties of that dung becoming something that's really good for fuel. They don't have hardly any wood in the ancient world, at least in Israel they didn't. And so they would burn up this dung salt mixture, and the dried patties of dung with a really lot of salt would sometimes last for 2 or 3 hours in the community, whereas if they just dried it, it wouldn't last hardly at all. So when Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, people immediately are wondering, Which pile am I?
Yeah.
Which pile am I in?
Which one?
Am I in the good pile that, you know, preserves and enhances and whatever, or am I in the pile that's not going to do a whole lot, but except when it's time to fertilize the crops, or am I in the dung heap pile? And that's why in Luke 14, Jesus says, it is no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. Okay? Now, you have that lesson down. Now let's look at, what does that mean for you and me? You are the salt of the earth. What it basically means is God is going to find a use for you. This is in the Sermon on the Mount. This is this broad discipleship lesson to everybody who's listening to Jesus preach. And it's not just for the disciples, it's for everybody. And what he's basically saying is God is going to find a use for you as long as he can. There are going to be times when you're really good and useful. There are going to be times when not so much. And there are going to be times when you're almost ready to be thrown away. He's still going to use you. And the funny thing that an ancient Israelite would catch is salt was also used for light. So if, even at the very end of your life, if you're ready to be burned up and used for the community oven for fuel, there's going to be light coming from it. And then he turns around immediately and he says, and you're the light of the world. And then he uses two images. He says, a city, you know, is what? Who remembers from the reading? City on a hill. What's a city on a hill? What does that mean? It's going to last longer than anything else because it can see its enemies coming. But it's also going to be real easy to spot on the horizon. You're meant to be a light. Whether we're doing free day or whether we're holding church service, we're called to be light. And I can tell you, anyone who spent any time here on Tuesday at Free Day, it was an amazing experience. And the gospel of Jesus Christ was preached without saying a word. Why? Because our lights were shining. I think the power of the gospel, and so oftentimes we hear it, and we've heard it, and we've heard it, and we've heard it, and we're like, has no power. And so if a scripture gets to you like that, and you say, I've heard this before, do a deep dive, because God has something else to say to you. It doesn't matter how old you are, how tired you are, how weak you are, how strong you are. God's not finished with you, and God certainly isn't finished with me, because he's going to use that salt and use that light as long as we are willing vessels for him. So ultimately, it's not, I'm done, I'm ready, I'm going to retire, I'm going to take it easy. Jesus never says you don't have to be salt or light anymore. On the contrary. Notice he doesn't say you will be. This wasn't kind of a promise or a prophetic word that you might ultimately be this. He said, right now, you are. You're preaching whether you're saying a word. You're giving testimony for Christ whether you're saying a word. Because by virtue of our saltiness and our light that our God made us to be, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, sometimes super salty, sometimes not so salty. But the curious piece about it, salt can never lose its saltiness. As long as it's sodium chloride, or any other kind of chloride, it's going to be salty. So salt and light, do your job. Sometimes use words, sometimes use free days, sometimes do acts of charity, sometimes smile, sometimes just show love. But you must always be salt and light.